Hello and welcome to this video all about dynamic theatre. My name is Mark Wentworth. I'm the creator of Color Psychodynamics, and I want to tell you the story of dynamic theatre and how through color and color psychodynamics, dynamic theatre came into being. And the best way to tell you this story is to show you a PowerPoint, which I'll talk through and tell you the stories. So, dynamic theatre, making the invisible visible. And the reason I think it's making the invisible visible is because we're made up of so many invisible threads, stories, connections, and even, with color. For me, color, most people are quite colorblind, as in the fact that they don't notice color until they actually want to make a change with color. So that's why, equally, I think it's the invisible becoming more visible. So, as in all good stories, it starts with once upon a time. And I do think that it's always good to know the creation story. Whether you're studying a method and a practice, or indeed you've created something yourself, it's always good to actually know, where did it all begin? How did it come into being? Because then, like that, you're understanding all of the invisible threads, the synchronicities, and kind of the magic that made and created the method, either that you're learning and practicing or that you yourself have created. It's always good to tell the creation story. So, where did it begin? So, way back in 2003, I was teaching a color class, and with color, I've always wanted to make it a little bit different. And the fact of, I can look at a color, you can look at a color, but excuse me, it was almost in the sense of, well, what would happen if you were this color? Imagine how you would be. What would you act like? How would you be? So I was asking people in this group to be red. And what I noticed is, well, the energy, firstly, the energy was pretty flat, and everyone was more or less doing the same thing. They were doing what they thought they should do, rather than what they were, maybe the truest sense of the relationship. So there was this, call it divine inspiration, a spark. Um, Probably a good way of understanding it is in a talk I was listening to with Elizabeth Gilbert. She tells the story of a poet living in Yorkshire in England. And this poet said she could hear the poem come rumbling across the moors, and she knew she needed to sit down and capture the poem in that moment. Otherwise, it would rush through her house and it would move on to someone else. So I love that metaphor as the way she could feel it. And that's how I felt in that moment of thinking, let's do something different. And at the time this was happening, I was with my friend and colleague, co-creator of dynamic theatre, Filipe De Moura. And we said, let's do it differently. Let's take something and twist it. What about if we had everyone playing the same thing, but no one knew they were playing the same thing? So we paused the group and I said, let's try something a little bit different. Let's be more playful. And I said, okay, you all now represent something. I didn't tell them what it was, but just be and trust. And what was so noticeable was the change in the energy in the room. It was like high energy. everyone started being and doing something. Everyone was doing something different. People were laying on the floor, some people were marching, some people were just standing still. And I remember saying to Philippe, this is red. This is people's true relationship with the color red, not what they were doing before. And that was the very, very first aspect of dynamic theatre. Of course, it wasn't called dynamic theatre back then, because we didn't have a name for it. It was just something that came. And then between 2003 and 2006, we were experimenting with it. I was doing different groups and practicing and asking people to sort of volunteer, because I wanted to get to know it much more deeply. And also, there was something very sacred, but also something very special about this. And along with that sense of sacredness and specialness, there needed to be a certain amount of responsibility. It's almost like kind of know what you're doing. So we were practicing getting to know it and understanding how it actually worked. And by then, it did have the name of dynamic theatre because we were using drama and it was pretty dynamic. I remember one lady saying after we played out something to do with relationship, she said, if you don't want to know the truth, don't do it in dynamic theatre. And that actually has followed all the way through. It's brutally truthful, but equally, it's incredibly insightful at the same time. And also, somewhere between, I would say, 2005 and 2007, probably more 2005, 2006, I met Manuela Maciel. And for those of you who know psychodrama, sociodrama, you will know Manuela. Manuela lives in Portugal. And I introduced dynamic theatre to Manuela and a mutual friend, and just to show them what I was playing with, what I was doing. Manuela was incredibly excited about it because obviously she's a psychodramatist and she was seeing this something new coming into being. And I was honored the fact that she invited me to present dynamic theatre at the first sociodrama conference in Lisbon in 2007. Let's say the first public sharing in 2006 was to a group in Bristol in the UK. Dynamic theatre and sociodrama and psychodrama world met in Lisbon, I think it was in October of 2007. So that was its first outing into psychodrama and sociodrama. And then during that time, somewhere between 2007 2008, obviously Manuela saw it and I was calling it dynamic theatre. And of course, she wanted something to take it and to give it a name which fitted more into the world of psychodrama. Auxiliary is a term that is in psychodrama. It's when we play another role. And she came up with the name Incognito Auxiliary, which I think is a brilliant name because it fits so perfectly well within the psychodrama and sociodrama, and indeed everywhere, because the roles are played incognito. No one knows who is playing what. And equally, around that time, I think it was around about 2008, Manuela went to America and she shared it with Zerka Moreno. So it was quite an honor that, firstly, Zerka Moreno, which she was the wife of Jacob Moreno, creator of psychodrama. So for me, it was quite an honor that Zerka actually got to see this creation, which goes between dynamic theatre and incognito auxiliary. Although for me, it's always dynamic theatre. And equally, it was quite an honor that in last year, um, I was awarded from the American Society of Group Psychotherapy and Psychodrama. I was awarded the Zerka Moreno Award for contribution to psychodrama around the world. And so that had a very special meaning to me, knowing that dynamic theatre was part of that, and Zerka had actually seen it in its beginning stages. Um, since then, dynamic theatre has been around the world. I've had the pleasure of sharing it in New York at the uh, what's the name of the hospital? Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, with nurses and helping them understand stress and patients, as well as at the NYU, New York University, in the drama department with drama teachers, helping them to find and discover ways of being more spontaneous. Because the one thing with dynamic theatre, it's very, very spontaneous because you're not controlled or you're not limited by a role, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. In London, well, in London, we've done many, many different variations with dynamic theatre. There's literally nothing that you can't put into the space of dynamic theatre. And that's what I love about it, whether it's an inanimate object or whether it's a person, a project. There's nothing that you cannot bring into play. Um, I remember one time working with some coaches who were very much focused on helping people explore abundance. And I placed, unknowingly to them, I placed money because that was their focus. And what's interesting is they all walked in the opposite direction, which was a little bit well, it's a little bit interesting, a little bit uncomfortable for them when they did find out it was money, but equally, it helped them to deepen their connection and understand their own process and why they were doing the work they were doing. In Nepal, we had the opportunity to, that was myself, Philippe, and a couple of other friends. We had the opportunity to take dynamic theatre to work with children who'd been caught up in kind of civil wars, and help them explore ways of moving on and starting to recover. And in Melbourne, that was last year in 2023, um, it was bringing color to life on stage, helping people to understand their different aspects in relationship to their life path colors. And in, well, that's going back a bit, around about well, maybe 2008, 2009, we started doing a training teaching people how to become practitioners of dynamic theatre. And we now have practitioners in Portugal, Sweden, and the UK. And as you will see, we're starting a new program next year in 2025. So dynamic theatre, it will, for me, it will always be dynamic theatre because that's what it was in the beginning. And the thing I love about dynamic theatre is this: it inspires the world to play. It kind of takes us back to that essence of childhood. You know, if you've ever been around children who are playing spontaneously, not only is the laughter, but their energy and their creativity is almost like quite infectious. You know, in the moment, it can be a table, a chair, and suddenly it's a spaceship, it's a castle. And no matter how much you know it's a chair and it's a table, in that moment in time, it is a spaceship and a castle. and anything is possible within that. So in dynamic theatre, it kind of helps us get back to that, whether we're playing, whether we're actively involved in playing a role, or we're just in the energy of dynamic theatre. It reminds us how to play again. And what is dynamic theatre? It's an integration of psychodrama, depth psychology, and shamanism. And we bring personal and social stories to life. And we have the opportunity to step out of the everyday and into the realm of extraordinary. I always get stuck with that word, extraordinary possibility. And that means, which I'll talk about in a bit, is we get to step out of our everyday roles. And then using the medium of drama, we enter into the healing state of Dionysian ecstasy in order to create magic and sacred alchemy. What does that mean? So, way back in ancient Greece, the original, back to kind of the ancient aspect of theatre, is all the actors would wear masks, but they would be completely blank. And as soon as they put on the mask, they were almost stepping out of their everyday and they were allowing the god Dionysus, who is connected to drama and ecstasy, allowing something else to come through them. And it was considered a sacred art. And here it is in dynamic theatre. It's no ordinary drama because all roles are played incognito. No one knows who they are. And when we do that, it allows the I to become we, us, and it, and the microcosm to become the macrocosm. You know, it's quite amazing to have people when they stand in the space of maybe of a city or a country or a world leader from the past. And somehow they feel this very different energy, which is beyond the roles they normally play in their day to day. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. So back to the beginning, dynamic theatre is an integration of psychodrama, depth psychology, and shamanism. And we're going to go through those one by one. So psychodrama is and was created and developed by Jacob Moreno starting in 1925 and probably before. And Moreno describes it as a science that explores the truth by dramatic methods. And that's exactly it. That's what I love about it. So instead of talking about it, one of the phrases for Moreno is don't tell me, show me. Bring it to life. You know, what I love about any kind of action methods, and certainly what I've learned from psychodrama, is working with a team or working in business. Instead of sitting around a table talking about maybe a challenge or a new project, it's like, no, let's forget all of that. Let's bring it to life in action. Let's bring it into drama. Let's bring it into theatre. And let's play all these different roles. And that's what when I was studying color and working with color, and it was like, no, me and color have a different role to play. And it was very much imagining how would I be if I was red? How would I be if I was green? That led me towards it. And I discovered psychodrama through learning about regression therapy, actually. This is another part of the story and telling you the history of, well, my story and dynamic theatre's story is I loved drama and everything like that, and playing and imagining to be a different roles when I was at school. Some of my reports would always say, Mark would really do well if he didn't actually have such an active imagination. And sometimes I think I would love to show my teachers now about what I'm doing and how my active imagination has really evolved and played such a huge part in the work that I've developed over the years. But anyway, uh, it was around about 2000. Well, it was 2000 that I met my teacher of psychodrama, and I would say Jung. And that was a man called Roger Woolgar. And I was learning regression therapy in relation to color, which I'm going to talk about in another video. It will be in the one called Color, What is Color Psychodynamics? Anyway, it was through learning regression that I learned and the name of psychodrama. And that's where I learned more about the method. And it kind of suddenly it gave me a framework that made total sense to everything that I'd been doing with the acting and the being and imagining beforehand. Now, Jacob Moreno and psychodrama, you may know of sociodrama. Psychodrama is where it's about my story. Sociodrama is about society stories, cultural stories that affect all of us on a personal level, but it belongs to the social aspect. Social atom, uh, social atom, well, that's an interesting one because that's about understanding about the relationships and who makes up the people around me, who is my connections, who am I connected with. So you might say that Jacob Moreno, and I have seen it written that Jacob Moreno could be considered the grandfather of likes on social media platforms because he was studying in social atom and sociometry about our societal relationships, who we're connected to, who has more likes and more connections to the other. That's social atom. Role theory is about getting to know all the roles we play, and about how we start to develop new roles. Role reversal. Now, a lot of people know role reversal, but maybe not by that name. Very often people know it as empty chair, and that comes from Fritz Perls and Gestalt. And that's where you have an empty chair, and anything and anyone can be in that empty chair. Yeah, and you have a conversation with it, and then at some point you switch and you sit in the role of whoever you've placed in the chair. Now, Fritz Perls actually came to and attended a lot of Moreno's groups in New York, and it was that inspired or was renamed the empty chair. And at some point, Fritz Perls did send a letter to Zerka Moreno acknowledging that actually the empty chair is actually role reversal. So I guess in a way, the methods, when people see things like that, in a way, you might say if you hear of incognito, auxiliary, or dynamic theatre, in essence, it's dynamic theatre because that's where it's understanding and knowing the roots. So it's always knowing, where did it originate from? What's the history? In art, when you're looking at a piece of art, you're always exploring what is its provenance? What is its originality? Where did it come from? So I always think that's why I like creation stories, because it's what is the provenance of what I'm learning, either as a method or something I'm creating. That's why I want to tell you the creation story of dynamic theatre. Another aspect of dynamic theatre is depth psychology. And it's, as it says here, it's the awareness of something greater than the I, bigger than me. And it's having an awareness that there's soul. It's kind of something within me which makes me an individual. And that soul communicates via symbolic language, whether it's archetypes, color, dreams, myth, and synchronicity. And I remember a Jungian therapist experiencing dynamic theatre, and her description is, she said, this is like Jung's active imagination, but in action. And the reason she said that is because no one knows what they're doing They're just trusting their spontaneous response impulses, nothing more. James Hillman is very much kind of archetypes, and Joseph Campbell is very much kind of the hero's journey. So that very much all of that archetypes, of course, color, dreams, myths, and synchronicity. And so it's always paying attention to that which is not, I would say, in the everyday visible or in everyday consciousness. Then we have shamanism, and shamanism is considered to be one of the oldest forms of spiritual practice in the world. And I've seen it dated somewhere between 40,000 and 100,000 years. So I think when you put it on, when you put that on a timeline to more other religions that we know now or spiritual practices, when you put, let's say, 100,000, 40,000 years, you start to see the scale of things. And what I love about shamanism is it was practiced in many different parts of the world who had no connection, and yet the similarities are incredible. And so they had no internet, but they had a different kind of internet. You might kind of say they had what Jung called the collective unconscious, which connects all of us. And the intention and the idea of shamanism, it's about rebalancing everything that is out of natural order. It's very much kind of understanding that nature is a living being, and it's about how we live in harmony with that and how we come back into balance and live in balance with nature, and equally, I would say, with ourselves, which is the essence of what color psychodynamics is about. It's about bringing you back into a natural order. It's reharmonizing with yourself. Michael Harner was an anthropologist, and he founded the Foundation of Shamanic Studies, where he taught core shamanism. Core shamanism is a bringing together and an integration of shamanic practice from around the world. And what I like about Michael Harner, he was absolutely very clear, and the same with Sandra Ingerman. Both of them are absolutely clear that when they teach, they're not teaching people to be shamans, but they're teaching them to be shamanic practitioners. For them, shamans were only those where it came down as almost like as a heritage. It was part of their bloodline. It was part of their tribal. And that's what I like about them. They're kind of bringing together. And Sandra Ingerman is known much more for her work on soul retrieval. And that, again, is where something is out of balance, out of order. There's a sense of soul loss, something has stepped away. And the idea of soul retrieval, part of the soul has stepped away. Soul retrieval aims to bring that back. And I would say, from that perspective, what I've experienced and what I know of dynamic theatre is, in a way, we are working with an aspect of soul retrieval, certainly when we're working with a personal story or even with a business story. And the reason coming back to creation stories, when I'm working with businesses and working with groups, I very often ask them to tell me, what's your creation story? Where did it all begin? Because it's like if we retell the story, like if you've ever seen the film of Steve Jobs, it tells the creation story of where it all began and how it started in that garage. That's a creation story. So if you ever feel lost, what's your creation story? Where did it all begin? If you have a business and you kind of lost your way a bit, come back to the beginning. Where did it all begin? How did it begin? What was the inspiration? And when you do that, you reconnect with all the energy that was present when you created it. And it's also understanding all the influences and the integrations. Again, I use a metaphor, it's a bit like cooking. It's like bringing all these ingredients together, mixing them together to create whatever you're creating. Let's come back to role. Um, for all roles are played incognito, enabling the invisible to become visible. So think about it for a moment. When we're born into a role. We're born as either a son or a daughter, and then maybe we are a sibling. We are already a sibling when we're born, or we have siblings later on. So we become brother, sister. Then we start school. So we become a student, and maybe we continue learning. So maybe we're an eternal student. Then we step into roles, whatever role we play at work. We become boyfriend, girlfriend. We constantly stepping into all these different roles, and some of them become very comfortable. We have the sense of, oh, you're so kind, you're always so kind, or oh, this person is always very disruptive. And every role we play has a boundary, has a limitation. Kind of in that sense of, if I am a caregiver, that role has a limitation. You know, maybe I play it too much. So maybe I get stuck in a role. And maybe that role becomes, if I get stuck in it, it's a bit like I become typecast. I mean, look at some of the actors. The one I use is to think of Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is, in a way, always playing and always has played some kind of action hero figure. So, in a way, you might say he's stuck in a role. We talk about, if we watch soap operas on TV, sometimes we can't see an actor or actress other than the role they played. And so, as much as actors play those roles in films and TV, we too have many different roles. We have many different roles. Now, there is maybe you've heard of the family systems. And again, many different parts. If it's not family system, you've probably heard of parts work, of where we're made up of all these different roles. I think of them as different roles. Sometimes they argue, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're in, sometimes they're in harmony with each other and they support each other. And sometimes, exactly, do they have peace? Maybe they're arguing. There's one part of you that's taking you that way, and another part of you wants to go that way. And so it's understanding that we have all of these different roles. And sometimes, like I said, we get stuck. And therefore, if we're stuck in these roles, firstly, we only know a part of who we are. And equally, the people we are connected to and those maybe we're in close relationship, maybe they only know so much of us. They don't know the depth of us, because we're always expected to play and be a certain way. Sometimes if we're a little bit tired, we're a little bit stressed, and maybe we're not so stuck in our roles, something can come out and people say, I don't know, and we say things and we go, oh, people call it Freudian slip, but otherwise you might say it's another role that's emerging. It's another role, it's another part of us that's sitting in the background. It's when this is what Jung would call shadow. It's the parts of ourselves that we've learned that are maybe not acceptable. So we sort of push them to the background, we hide them around, or we sort of bury them in the cellar or something like that. That the beauty of dynamic theatre is actually we can do great shadow work and we can get to know different roles and all the different parts of us when we don't know what we're playing, which for some people is a challenge, and other people, they love it. Because sometimes there's this sense of like, well, who do you want me to be? What do you want me to do? It's like, be yourself, do whatever you feel. And so, my question, what I would ask you here is consider all the roles, maybe write down all the roles, all the different parts of you, the many different roles, and how people relate to you. What is the common thing that people say about you? Oh, you are so kind, you are so patient, you are so whatever. Write that list and then consider what's on the opposite. Where are those roles? Because they're in there somewhere. You know, Jung always said it's about actually holding the tension of opposites. And again, what I love about working with dynamic theatre is we can explore these opposites, but in a very safe way, because sometimes we don't know. Um, yes, there's this. Um, oh yes, sorry. Sometimes I forget what I put in these, so you get. I'm as much surprised when I'm pushing a button here, as you're seeing them on the screen. Yes. So when we make space for the invisible, the numinous is always present. And the numinous is very often, it's a word that was used a lot by Jung, and it's about an invisible presence, which is somehow greater and has a sense of, I don't know, a higher purpose, a higher sense of uh, being, a divine, if you like. There's a sort of a sacred presence. And the origins of numinous, yes, it was used by Jung, but it was first used by a theologian called Rudolf Otto in his work of the idea of the holy. And again, it makes sense to understand this from my experience and those who've experienced dynamic theatre. There is always something sacred. You're stepping into something special. And we'll talk about that. And we'll come back to roles in a moment as well. But I just want to talk about how important the sacred aspect of it is. And it's only through the years of learning, experiencing, and getting to know dynamic theatre that helped me understand why from 2003, 2006, so for 3 years, we spent getting to know dynamic theatre because we felt that there was something very special and we needed to be respectful of it as a living being, if you like, and as a method before we started really sharing it with the world. So for Rudolf Otto, the numinous was made up of three parts. The first part was mysterium. I love the Latin terminology because it makes me feel like if you've ever seen anything of Harry Potter, I love these kind of words. So mysterium, and the meaning of mysterium is to experience with blank wonder, which I love because that is exactly what happens in dynamic theatre. Because we're asking you to step into a role, but you don't know what the role is. So we're inviting you to step in with blank wonder. And I think that's where it's a challenge for some people because they're so used to being told what to do. Because like every role that we play has an expectation. And therefore there are rules and guidelines. There are rules and guidelines in dynamic theatre. But at this moment, in this point, we're saying, just be open, be empty. Then The next word is part of the numinous is tremendum, which it's this is when we start having the sense of something sacred, something deeply profound has stepped into the presence of dynamic theatre. And that's why whenever we're running a group, whenever dynamic theatre is being done and yeah, performed in a way, it's always done within a container of a circle. There's something, it keeps the energy, it's a container, and there's something, it allows a space for the numinous to enter. And so it's an overwhelming power beyond myself. So it's the first part, so to go back, so I'm standing here or sitting in blank wonder. So I'm in a very neutral space and I'm surrendering to something greater than me. And that's the bit which sometimes is a challenge for those who like to be in control, for those who like to know what are the expectations. What am I? So, in a way, you might say for those who have a bit of control issues, dynamic theatre is very challenging because it's saying there's just do what you feel like. And then the third part is this is the origin of the word from fascinate. So I think it's pronounced, I've never, it's called fascinans. Apologies if it's incorrect pronunciation. And that is gracious potency. So I'm aware that I'm here with blank wonder. There's something overwhelming, which is greater than me. I'm surrendering to it to allow it to be inspired and to be spontaneous. And at the same time, I hold this sense of sacredness and gratitude to something bigger than me. So it's this whole aspect to being and playing within dynamic theatre. And that's, in a way, that's part of the learning, that's part of the training to understand the numinous and how we welcome it and how we bring in the sacred to dynamic theatre. So dynamic theatre. Let's look at the components when we work with dynamic theatre. Well, first of all, we have containment. Containment is, like I said, it's always done within a circle. So we create a group within a circle, or indeed, if we're working on an individual space, it's always done within a circle. That's part of the containment. The other aspect of the containment is with anything, coming back to creation story, I know the creation story. I'm contained within the story. When I'm contained within the story, I have that ability to know that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. If I know the creation story, the inspirations, and where it all began and how it began, then equally, just like in transgenerational work, when we're doing ancestral healing, we're looking back into the family to untangle the roots, to untangle the threads, which have maybe not such a healthy impact on us. And we're looking to untangle them so we have a really good flow of energy. And to me, whilst people apply that to family, I also think it applies to methodologies and whatever professional work we do as well. That's why I'm very, very, let's say it's a passion of mine to know the history, to know the creation story. When we're contained within the story, we have the knowing and the wisdom that all those who contributed to it are standing behind us. So if I tell you, like I've told you, that I know that the inspirations of dynamic theatre was psychodrama. So I know that part of my professional ancestry would be Jacob Moreno and all of those who came after him. Equally, I know because of depth psychology, I know there's Jung, Hillman, and all of those who've been involved in that. They stand behind me. In the shamanism and the respect of what it is, again, all of those stand behind me, supporting me within the story. And equally, it's that kind of, like I said, it's the provenance, the containment is the provenance. And also, it's probably important to say, I've mentioned psychodrama. Um, I'm not a psychodramatist. I haven't completed my training yet. It's ongoing. I have a teacher in America. It's ongoing. And I want to honor that because there's so many people who've dedicated between 4 and 7 years to learning and practicing to be able to call themselves psychodramatist and sociodramatist and social work with social atoms sociometry. So it's honoring that. That's part of the containment. And when you have that containment, you also have a very, very strong container. Think about when you make a cake, you bring all of the ingredients together and you pour them into a cake tin, into a mold. And it's then that you get the shape of the cake. If you don't have that, you just get this messy burn in the oven. To me, it's exactly the same thing when we do energetic work or any methodology, the container and everything that makes up the container. Commitment. Commitment is so it's commitment to the containment, if you like, but also it's commitment to, well, commitment to exploration, commitment to actually, I'm entering into this in a very conscientious way. So there's a commitment to the work. And then I would say commitment and intention sit side by side. The intention is, and the commitment is, we're entering into this space in a space of reverence, in a space of not knowing, because that's what I want to explore. That's what I want to understand more of. So my intention is getting clear on what it is I want to explore. My commitment is because I want to explore it. And in doing that, we then actually bring in the numinous because we've got all three of those which enable the numinous and the invisible realms to be present. And of course, we need a story. And going back to, and I want to tell you a story of dynamic theatre, of how it can really bring out and bring about change. Some years ago, I was working with a group and with a group of children, actually. They were about 9 and 10. And the sad commonality for the group was they'd all been victims of bullying. And this was just a one-off group. The group was ongoing, but my part was it. And because they were so identified in the role of victims, it was very difficult for them to identify with anything other than that. Yes, of course, they could outside of that, but within the school, they were very much identified as the victims of bullying. And so what we did is I had the idea of actually, in the space of dynamic theatre, to actually have them role reverse with superheroes. These mythical, comic based kind of mythical characters of superheroes. And what was interesting is when they stepped, bear in mind they didn't know. When they stepped into that, there was a notable shift in energy, just like way back at the beginning with Red, when dynamic theater first showed up. There was a noticeable change in their energy. They their voice was much clearer and much stronger, and they were talking about aspects of strength and courage. And the facilitator was looking at me and saying, "But they know." And it's like, no, they don't. They have no idea what they are playing and what they are doing. So we made notes of all the words and all the things they were saying. And then when we told them, first of all, they were a little bit shocked to understand that they've been playing superheroes. There's this shock. I would just see sort of like sense of kind of wow, this you could see a change. Um, and that was a beautiful thing to experience because what dynamic theater had done is it would shifted them from just over identifying with the victim into the space of something else, into another possible role. And what I said to them is think of it like this: you could not have experienced or felt all the things that you felt in that space unless it was already somewhere inside of you. And to me, that is the beauty of dynamic theater. And it goes back to what, when I was talking about Jung's shadow work, it allows us to tap into the parts of ourselves that maybe we don't know, maybe we've put away. And it helped those children to start to shift away and start to recognize their own strength of being, other qualities, and to on the healing process. And there's many stories that I have like that, and the practitioners we have, many stories of that, where it's just this whole sense of, I would say the best word is I see a sense of awe when you say, and this role was, because you're always revealing it in the end. The reveal is, if you're in the UK, if you've ever seen, remember the show from the 80s called Blind Date, and everything was behind a screen, and when they'd chosen their number one, two, or three, and they would say, "And you've chosen," and they reveal the screen. Sometimes when I'm doing dynamic theatre, it makes me think of that. It's like, "And you have chosen, and you have been playing," and reveal what it is. And that within itself, I would say within all of this, the containment and the commitment is firstly when you're playing the story, you get the gold, you get the kind of like the wisdom from the story. But after playing, there is also the integration of the information. We don't just leave it there. There's obviously ongoing work to be done as well. And just like I said about the working with the children and helping them to recognize there's something already within themselves, it's this poem from Hermann Hesse, where it says, "Only within yourself exists that reality for which you long. I can give you nothing that has not already its being within yourself. I can throw open to you no picture gallery but your own soul." And I like the children, but I would say in the probably hundreds and thousands of people of working that we've worked with over the years, it's that revealing to someone, having just played a role, that if it's a part of themselves that they'd never even considered was possible, that they didn't believe it's kind of part of who they are. And I think that for me is the absolute beauty of dynamic theatre. Next steps. I'm very pleased to be collaborating with the Moreno Institute in Latvia. If you're watching this before September 2024 and dynamic theatre, you're very curious and you want to explore more, in Latvia on the 21st, 22nd of September, I am hosting with the Moreno Institute In Search of Black Gold. So using dynamic theatre, this is very much about exploring the shadow aspect of ourselves, but more from the perspective of what Jung called the golden shadow, more the parts that are amazing, fantastic, that maybe we've learned to hide away and sort of dim our light down a bit. Dynamic theatre will certainly bring you onto the stage in full glorious golden light. And then again in 2025 with the Moreno Institute, we are starting a training program, which will be a hybrid training, which means it's going to be a mix of in-person and online. And the in-person will be in Riga, but there will be practice groups in other parts of the world as well. So if you do want to contact me and you don't know my details already, you can email me at mark@colourforlife.com. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Instagram at I am Colour for Life. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can find me under Mark Wentworth slash hyphen whatever it is, Colour for Life. It's written down the bottom there. And when I was really getting to know dynamic theatre, and again, it comes back to synchronicity. You know, I could sense I guess, the potential of dynamic theatre. And the synchronicity was around that time, this poem from Marianne Williamson came into my life. And to me, it totally sums up everything that dynamic theatre is. And it is, in every community, there is work to be done. In every nation, there are wounds to heal. And in every heart, there is the power to do it. And I know this is just to finish that, and the reason that is very poignant and very meaningful for this work with kind of dynamic theatre is to finish with telling you a story about working at a peace conference. I was invited to present dynamic theatre at a peace conference around about in 2008. And there was everyone who was attending because somehow they were connected to peace. And we did dynamic theatre. And we started more what you might say is in a sociodrama aspect of talking about different aspects of what makes up a community. So we had, let's say, what did we have? We had the community, we had the spiritual advisors or the religious leaders, we had the young people, we had the current generation, other aspects that make up a community. And one role which was left in the space of dynamic theatre was peace. And every person, every aspect said, we don't trust this. The young generation, let's say the young people were saying, no, we don't trust this. We need the current generation to tell us we can trust this. The current generation said, we don't trust it. The spiritual advisors said, no, we're advising you, we don't trust this. And there's a lot of total mistrust of peace. And when I revealed that the role that no one trusted was peace, people were playing, people standing in the space of peace were saying, but we're here, we're kind of like, we want to be part of you. And of course, everyone was a bit kind of, because they were all there working in some form or another for peace. And the question I asked them and left them to think about is, would you have acted and said the same thing about mistrusting, don't trust it, this is not real, if you had known that that role was actually peace? And of course, most of them, oh, I would say the majority of them said, no, they would have said something completely different. And where that left them was to really reflect personally and as their various groups of what did they really, really, truthfully believe about peace. So that's why back to the almost like back to the beginning again, where the lady said, if you don't want to know the truth, don't do it in dynamic theatre. And that's why the poem, in every community there is work to be done, in every nation there are wounds to heal, and this is my part, in every heart there is the power to do it. And that, I would say, is the intention, the commitment, and the purpose of dynamic theatre. I'll just stop sharing that now. So thank you very much for listening to, for allowing me to tell you the story of dynamic theatre, what it's all about, how it, the possibilities of it. And equally, I would just equally, as a final thing, just think about all the roles you play and how many of them, well, maybe it's time to get a new role. Maybe it's time to think about who else could I be? And so thank you very much. Keep a check out. There'll be dynamic theatre workshops, both online, in person, different places around the world. And see you sometime, somewhere very, very soon. And see you there. Bye bye.